camera up. There we are. Here I am. And I'd like to introduce Jim Small, who will be talking to us about Selenium, the testing tool for web-based applications.
All right. Can you see my screen, Craig?
I can, yes.
All right. So with that, I will get started. So a couple things. Selenium is a great tool. It's very useful, very powerful. However, it is not a beginner tool. So I have to assume that you have some background to get the most out of this presentation. So I typically use Python. So in terms of writing the programs for this presentation, it's all in Python. That said, Selenium is very flexible. It has bindings for a lot of popular languages, including C#, Ruby, Java, JavaScript, PHP, and others. So if you know multiple languages, it's usually not too hard to look at one language and kind of get the idea. For example, even for some of the stuff I did, I would look at Java, which I don't really know, but you can still you look and you kind of get the gist of it. So as long as you're have a pretty good background in one of the major languages, it should be pretty straightforward. You can always convert. The other thing is, so as Craig mentioned, Selenium is for web automation. So you need to be fairly comfortable with HTML, CSS, and it also helps if you know the basics of JavaScript. Yeah, I mean, you can learn as you go, but if you have no background, you're probably going to have to take some kind of a basic class just to get familiar with all the terminology and the options. I also assume that you're comfortable with Chrome and DevTools. That's something that's not hard to learn, but I don't really explain how to use it. I just show it. And then finally, you don't need too much of a background in actually developing web apps and testing, but it helps because that's really the main focus of Selenium is for web app testing. All right, so with that said, let's get started. So just a little bit about the history of Selenium. So in the early aughts, Jason Huggins of ThoughtWorks started working on an automated web application testing tool. And of course, why would he do that? Well, at the time, he was working at ThoughtWorks, and ThoughtWorks is a leader in agile testing. So they're all about automated application testing and making it easy. So he got a lot of support from his company for that. And at the time, the dominant tool was Mercury Interactive from Astra Quick Test. I'm sorry, I got that backwards. Astra Quick Test from Mercury Interactive. And the tool had a lot of challenges. It wasn't exactly ideal. It was also a commercial tool. It wasn't cheap. And there was definitely some dissatisfaction with it. So in part because of that tool, in part because he wasn't really satisfied with what was available, Jason started working on this and putting it together. And as he was thinking of a name, he came up with Selenium because since he wasn't particularly nuts about the tool in the company, Selenium is the antidote for mercury poisoning. So that's actually how the name came about, and it stuck. So that got ThoughtWorks actually decided to release that as open source in 2004, and it immediately attracted a lot of interest. In particular, Google was one of the early adopters and really liked it. And Google liked it so much that they created a complete solution for large-scale testing. And that basically turned into Selenium Grid, which I'll talk about later. So Google and ThoughtWorks started collaborating so much that they ended up basically forming the core team, and they're still working together to this day. So version 2 came along in 2007 that had a bunch of improvements. And then really, I think what most people think of as Selenium is version 3 that was released in 2016. The big thing with that is that the team basically took their WebDriver specification to the W3C, and they basically got it standardized. So the advantage of that is, now it's a W3 standard, so it's basically a web standard, and that also means that pretty much all the browser vendors support it. They're all on board because that's where that's the main standards body. So that really helps in terms of ensuring that everybody's on the same page and working together. And as I was creating this, version 4 actually came out in October, less than 3 months ago. And there's still, even with some of the documentation, is still kind of a work in progress. They kept it standard, so they worked with the W3C. So the new version of WebDriver is still standardized, and they also standardized the protocol. So the big thing about that is before, the protocol was basically just something they came up with, and there wasn't a standard way to communicate with the browsers, and that resulted in a lot of challenges. So now the protocol is also standardized, and one of the big advantages of that is by standardizing a protocol, it makes it easier to leverage all the enhanced features of browsers. Like, for example, by leveraging the WebDriver protocol, you can use the developer tools protocol in Chrome. So you can do anything with the browser. And that was kind of a sore spot because some of the tools allow that. And like before Selenium 4, that was a missing feature. And basically, Selenium's been really successful, and pretty much now, from what I have heard, it's considered the de facto QA tool for any kind of web app or browser type testing. All right, so in terms of how popular is it, just some data. So according to Enlift, I think they looked at about 200,000 organizations, and Selenium is the dominant tool. So it has almost a 28% market share, over 2.5 times the next leading competitor. So even though it's open source, and it's not backed commercially by one company, although there are, like typical open source, there are commercial options. It is by far the dominant tool and is tremendously popular. So definitely a good tool to learn if you're into any kind of testing or web application automation. So in terms of why, so the big problem, and this is part of why Selenium was created, is before Selenium, it wasn't very flexible. So a lot of tools, if you pick it, you basically have to use one language, or you have to use a proprietary language, or like a DSL, like a domain-specific language, and that's it. And the challenge with that is you might not like that language. Like for example, I believe with the old Mercury solution, it was like a version of VB Script, which it works, but it's not exactly. I don't find it the easiest language to write, and a lot of other people didn't care for it too. So it's nice when you're picking a framework or a solution if you can basically choose the language you want, as opposed to it being forced on you. So that was probably one of the biggest things that contributed to making Selenium so popular. Of course, it's free and open source, so it's easy to modify. And the other huge thing is, because Google created and contributed Grid, basically it's designed to be cloud scale. So I mean, obviously, if it works for Google, it's going to work for anyone. And since Google released all of that and contributed back into the project, it makes it very easy for any cloud or SaaS service or continuous integration delivery service. It makes it really easy for them to support it at scale. So because of that, it's a really popular, widely available service. Again, the standards helps, so everybody's on the same page. All the vendors, all the browsers, the community, pretty much, everybody's on board. That this is the reference implementation, and it's also portable. So this is another big advantage. Before Selenium, a lot of testing frameworks tend to be, they're just Windows, or they're just Mac, or maybe they're just mobile. But Selenium supports everything. So that's another big advantage. So when you put all these things together, that's why it's so popular. Okay, so in terms of Selenium, when I started digging into this, so actually before I did this presentation, I've heard a little bit about it, but I never used it. So when I started looking into it, it's a little intimidating at first. There's definitely a bit of a learning curve, and there's all these different pieces. So when people say Selenium, usually what they actually mean is WebDriver. That's the part that's standard, and that's the core that facilitates the browser automation. But there's also a bunch of other components. So you hear about Selenium RC and some other stuff. That's all legacy. That's pretty much deprecated. So I'm not going to talk about that. But what's active is, in addition to WebDriver, you also have the IDE. So this is basically a browser extension. So you add it into Firefox, Chrome, or Edge, and this allows you to do record and playback. So if you've ever played with a macro tool that makes it, easy in a window type environment to record and play stuff back, this is the same idea. So this is essentially the low or the no code option. It's some people like it, some people don't, but it is there. And they are putting a lot of effort into making it better, and they're trying to port it over to Electron. I'm not exactly sure where that's at, but that's an interesting option. And then, as I mentioned, Grid, this was also completely reworked in the latest version 4. So this supports fully distributed testing. And what they added is now in version 4, it fully supports containers, Docker, Kubernetes. Again, no surprise since it's Google's a big contributor. So what this means is, this is just super flexible. So in this presentation, I'm really focused just on doing a relatively simple thing with one app, right? So for that, running locally or running on a test server is probably fine. However, if you get into a complex application, especially at a large company, it's not unusual to have over 1,000 tests. And you might want to support, all the major browsers. You might want to support multiple versions of browsers. You might want to try 32 and 64-bit. You might want to try on different platforms. You might want to try mobile. So you basically see really quickly, this becomes an N by N problem, and you're talking a huge amount of resources and time to test everything. So that's where a SaaS option and something like Grid gets really appealing, where I can basically set up I can have one computer that sets up all my test cases, thousands of test cases, basically connects into the Grid, and basically just fully distributes everything. So I can run everything in parallel, and it's all designed to work well. So that just gives me tremendous flexibility to basically do my testing in a reasonable amount of time. Okay, so I mentioned the multiple languages, so I just wanted to cover this briefly. So the core languages are basically what are supported natively by the project. So in addition to Python, they also support C#, Ruby, Java, and JavaScript. So Selenium is actually written in Java, so that's obviously the most popular language. Python's next. But all these languages see, and JavaScript, all these languages see pretty good usage. And then there's a whole bunch of third party. So PHP is third party, but it's supported by Facebook. So it's obviously well supported. That doesn't see a lot, but it still sees some usage. And then there's also Go, Haskell, Perl, R, and Dart. So I didn't see any usage statistics on those, but so there's a pretty good array of languages to choose from. And what that means is when you're writing your testing scripts, you can basically pick any one of these languages, a testing framework or a web app framework from any one of these languages that supports Selenium, and away you go. So that's really convenient, especially if you're using a particular web app, particular testing framework. You can basically interface directly with Selenium as opposed to having to learn something else. Okay, in terms of browsers, so I believe it's broader than this, but these are the ones that are specifically mentioned. So most people use Chrome. I'm sure that's not a surprise. It's by far the most popular browser currently out there right now. Although most people still also test with Firefox. Edge is also pretty popular, especially I can tell you in the enterprise. A lot of enterprise companies are switching to it to basically get rid of IE. Safari is somewhat popular. And then surprisingly, there's still significant usage for IE. It's like the undead browser. Even Microsoft wants to get rid of it, but somehow it can't go away. I didn't find any usage statistics for Opera, but that is, or Opera, that's also supported. And there is some mobile support, but that's just something I didn't get into in that presentation, or in this presentation rather. Okay, so in terms of, a lot of times when you start looking at something, it's basically to scratch your own itch, and that's definitely the case with me. So I'm sure some people can relate to this scenario. So, working at a client, and I was asked to help support a web app. And this web application, it's important for the company. It's public facing. However, the people that set it up were no longer there. It wasn't well documented. So we started looking at it, and basically everything was out of date. All the components and everything were years out of support. Um, and it was kind of a challenging situation. So that's certainly not unusual to run into that. But the problem with this particular application was, because things weren't well documented, basically, a developer would be hired, and the person would make some changes, and because things weren't documented, the app is somewhat complex. It would end up breaking the app, and it got to the point where the business unit owner, didn't want anybody to do anything because the app would constantly get broken, and obviously that's unacceptable, right? It's public facing. You can't have it just fail, right? If something is facing your customers, it's got to be reliable. So the big challenge we started with was, that we're in this situation, and there's no test, no documentation, right? So when I started looking at this, I did notice that the key application analyst, he basically knew, okay, these are the key things we have to check to make sure that the application's working. So that's a start. Okay, so first step is, we got to create tests, and this is something that before I got into development, I really didn't appreciate just how important tests are. And this is about Selenium, not about testing, although they do go hand in hand. But what's really crucial, and I try to explain this, especially when I talk to managers or people that don't have a development background, the reason tests are so important is, when you create an application, you might feel like, testing is slowing you down, but where they really save you is if you have good tests in place, then basically when you change the application, you run your test suite, and your test will tell you if everything important is still working. In an ideal world, they tell you everything, but that's unrealistic, right? In any complex application, you're never going to have perfect coverage. But if you have good tests, they'll basically test everything that's important. So that way, when you go into the application, you change the configuration, you change the code, you upgrade something, you run your tests, and your tests tell you, hey, all the important stuff is still working. And that is so important, because if you don't have that, then you end up in a situation like this where you're terrified to touch the application, because if you touch it, you have no idea if you're going to break something. So that's why tests are so critical. So when we got this app, the first thing we did is we sat down and we figured out, okay, what are the important features? What do we need to make sure is working when we make a change? And we went through, we documented all that stuff. We took screenshots, and we created a document. So not ideal, but at least we have a document that basically shows, okay, if you want to test the application from an end user point of view, these are all the steps you go through, all the steps and details, screenshots of what to look for. And at least it was something, right? So at least now, if we have a developer, somebody make a change, at least we had something we could provide, so they could basically make sure it wasn't broken. So that was an improvement. However, going through like a 40-page document, looking at screenshots, and trying to manually compare everything, it's a lot better than nothing. But boy, that's pretty tedious. It's slow. It's manual. It's not. If you're a developer, that's not really ideal. So I was thinking, how can we get better, right? This is error prone. because it's so tedious and time consuming. If you make a small change, there's resistance to doing it. If the developers want to make, changes, they have to coordinate with testers, or it's just undesirable. Plus, the other big problem that we had is, even with this good test documentation, typically, only one browser was being tested. So whatever browser the user happened to use, they test in that. So that's not really great, right? Because you really want to test in all the browsers you support, not just the one the user happens to use. Plus, if you want to test multiple versions, if you want to test mobile, this is just, we need to do better, right? So I had heard of Selenium from training. I heard a lot of people mention it, that it was very powerful. It was a great solution. So I thought, all right, let's take a look. So I basically grabbed a copy. So with Python, Python has really good package management. So you can literally just pip install Selenium, and away you go. So one thing I wanted to mention, this is a little dated. It's not perfect, especially like with 4.x. Some of the things are different, but it's still a great resource. So this is on Read the Docs, and I will post these slides, so that's a hyperlink to it. But if you just search for Selenium with Python, pretty sure it's the first thing that's going to come up. And this is just a nice kind of guide if you want to see, like, how do I get started? How do I look for stuff? How do I complete for various tasks? What are common issues? There's just a lot of stuff that's covered in here. So this is a really good resource. Okay, so starting with a hello world. So I actually, I've been trying to stay current. So I actually am running Python 3.10, which is, it's not exactly bleeding edge, because 3.10.1 came out, but it's still pretty new. But there are some pretty sweet features like pattern matching that are introduced in 3.10. So because of that, I wanted to use that. But I believe 4.0 supports back to 3.7. So as long as you have a current version of Python, you should be good. One thing I do in this hello world script, it's a big no-no, but I just do it to make it easy to see, is I'm basically doing a hard wait by importing time and doing a sleep. So you'd never ever do that in a real program. But I just did that, just so, like, if you actually run this code, if you don't have that sleep in there, basically it's going to fire up the browser, go to the page, and close it right away. So I basically have it sleep for 3 seconds just so you can see that it's actually working. So this is 3.x, and the reason I did 3.x is because you're still going to see that, because 4.x is so new, most people are going to refer to this. However, what you really want, and it's slightly changed, is the 4.x index. So the difference is, now you use the service configuration. But other than that, it's pretty much the same. So one thing that I did gloss over here that's a little annoying is, with Selenium, you actually have to get a literal WebDriver binary. So that's the program you run that actually controls the browser. And it's not that big of a deal. I have it, it's documented on the Chromium documentation, and I also have it here in the notes. You basically just go to Selenium download sections, you select your browser, you follow the links, and then you find the binary. However, there are some annoyances with this. So first of all, with your driver browser, you have to get it for each browser, right? So for every browser I want to test, I have to go, and this obviously, this has to be done by the vendor, right? So if I want to get it for Chrome, I have to go to Chrome's website. If I want to get it for Firefox, I have to go to Mozilla's website. If I want to get it for Edge, I have to go to Microsoft's website. If I want, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So that's kind of tedious. Not always, but often, that driver browser has to match your browser, right? So for example, with Chrome, actually I can't remember on Windows if it's like this or not, but with a lot of the browsers, like for example, if you're using a 64-bit browser, you have to get a 64-bit driver. If you're using a 32-bit browser, you have to get a 32-bit driver. And even that's not consistent. It depends if it's Linux or Windows or Mac. And then for Chrome, one thing I can tell you, the version has to match, right? So if you're using, version 96, 053, whatever of Chrome, you need the same driver browser. So yeah, I guess that's not horrible, but the problem is, I'm sure you've noticed that now browsers auto upgrade, which is nice, But what I've heard is if you don't keep these browser drivers in sync with your actual browser version, then you can get weird issues. So now, like, every time, if I think, if I leave my computer overnight and Chrome automatically updated itself, because I closed it down and I reopen, I might not even realize it's a new version. I might have problems, right? So that's kind of annoying. So I was thinking, I don't like this. So it turns out somebody else didn't like this either, and there's something called WebDriver Manager. So this is just a little bit of work, and it basically takes care of getting the right version for you. So it basically looks at your browser, and it automatically gets the right version. Now there is this does add a little bit of complexity because there are slight variations depending on the vendor, but I still, in my mind, this is still better because this tool is going to look at my browser and it's going to make sure I have the right driver for my specific browser. So I think that's great. And the configuration options for it are really simple. I saw other people use it; they seem to be happy with it. So to me, this seems like a win. Anywhere I can get rid of tedium and automate it, to me is a good thing. So just kind of continuing on that track, and you can do the same thing with 3.x, but basically this is the same hello world, but we're just adding this line number 8, this WebDriver manager. We're just adding that, and then basically in that Chrome service, we're just adding this Chrome driver manager install, and basically that'll automatically download and use the right version. So nice little convenience, and that way you're always using the right driver browser. Okay, so I have Selenium. I know the basics. I'm ready to go. Okay, so now basically the way I went through this is, I basically had my documentation of all my manual tests that I wanted to automate. So basically, if I look at my web application, so we did actually find a new developer that we're very happy with, and he brought everything up to date, and we tested it. However, as we're adding more features and stuff, we just want to make sure that, every time something changes, we test the core features and make sure they're working, as desired. So with our test site, we have to specifically log into the test site. Then when you log into the test site, that brings up the web app. Then you log into the web app as a user. That's going to start you in a calendar view. From there, you navigate to a specific date. And basically what this is this is essentially a calendaring application, and it's basically for, it's a public company that they have all their meetings are public. And so basically they have a schedule of, here are all our meetings. And then basically you can click on a meeting, and if there's like an agenda or documents or anything like that, you can basically download them. So the problem we had in the past is the downloads are separate, are basically stored in a separate place. So when somebody would change the application, and they'd basically break the ability to download things. And that's especially bad because when you go into the meeting, there's basically meeting invites. So you go in the meeting, and basically if you're on your phone, you click on the meeting and it automatically schedules it in your calendar. However, if you break the download functionality, then all that breaks, and then the users get unhappy, the business unit owner gets unhappy. So we need to make sure that functionality doesn't get broken. So what we're going to do is log into the app, select a specific date, select a specific meeting, and then in that meeting, we're basically going to look at the agenda for the meeting, which is a PDF. We're going to download that PDF, and that basically makes sure that downloading is working, and then we're going to validate the contents inside it. So if I go through all these steps in an automated fashion, then basically I know that the critical functionality is working, and my site is good, right? And by automating this, whenever somebody makes a changes a configuration option, upgrades a component, basically they can run this test and basically know with confidence, yes, things are still good. So just kind of stepping through. So when I go to the site, like I said, the first thing, because it's a test site and we have some experimental features and stuff like that on there, it's password protected. So when you try to go to the site, the first thing that happens is it challenges you to log in. So this is relatively straightforward. It's just basic authorization. And there's a couple different options. So I ended up doing the first option, and that's how you do it in code. A couple comments on this. So in terms of this presentation, I wanted to keep it simple, and basically just show code, like here's how you do it, right? However, this is definitely not how you would do it in production, right? There's a lot of problems with this. So first of all, you would never hard code configurations and especially passwords in a file. That's a big no-no because anybody who's done any kind of development for any length of time, if you do that, what happens is you're going to accidentally check it into source control, and then God forbid that your repo is public, you just published access to the world. And there are, people all over the world that constantly look at GitHub for stuff like that. And so if you accidentally do it, somebody's going to get in, and it's a bad scene, right? So if you wanted to do something like this, I can't remember the library off the top of my head, but there's basically a lot of good options where you can throw this in a config file. And what I like to do for passwords, I don't remember the library off the top of my head, but there's a library. It supports Windows, Mac, and Linux. And when all of those operating systems have a credentials management built into the operating system. So basically what you can do is you can say, okay, I'm going to load these credentials, the username and password, and these credentials are tied to this user. So basically what happens in the operating system, if I'm logged in as that user, it decrypts that, and I can put it in the environment, and then I can read it into my program. But if I'm not logged in as the right user, then this stuff is encrypted and you can't access it. So it's not awesome security. I mean, even better would be like a key management solution, but at least, at least it's not just there in plain text, because I personally don't like having usernames and passwords in files. I just think that's bad. So at least there's some basic protection. Or like I said, even better would be, using a key manager or Vault. But those are whole other topics. So I didn't want to throw that into this presentation. So going through this, so I showed in the hello world how I set up my driver, and then basically I just do a driver.get and pass in the URL, and I'm just building the URL from the components, the actual URL, and then the access username and password. I also wanted to mention there's other ways to do it. There's a JavaScript executor. I didn't need that in my case, but that's an option. And in 4.x, there's a new binder API that's really cool, and you can load credentials, and you can associate, say, like if I go to this URL or this domain, use these credentials, which is really cool. But for some reason, they had examples for all the core languages except for Python, and I couldn't figure it out yet. I'm close, but I couldn't quite get it working. So that's another option that's coming. But like I said, for this option, this was good. One other thing too that I wanted to mention is, if you're on a Mac, I don't believe option 1 or 2 work on a Mac with Safari. So if you're on a Mac, you're going to be compelled to dig into option 3 if you want to automate Safari. Okay, so now I got there. Now basically my app pops up. Now, before you can get into the app, you actually, in the production app, you wouldn't have that. You would just start here. But again, this is for the test site. So when I actually get to this page, I already have an account. So I basically, as a user, I would type in my email address, I type in my password, and I click login. So now what we have to do is, in Selenium, we want to automate that. So in order to do that programmatically, I have to basically look at the web elements within the DOM. So the DOM, or the document object module, that's basically the web page. So in object format, everything on it is part of the DOM. And I need to look through that programmatically and find the right elements so I can control them through Selenium. Just to start digging into the mechanics of how Selenium works, we have what are called locators. So when I open up a web page, if I open up DevTools, so for example on Chrome, and I believe in most browsers you can hit F12, and that will let you view the DevTools. That lets you inspect the entire page, and you can see all the HTML, CSS, JavaScript. You can basically see everything on the page, and you can interact with it. So the locators are, how do we find specific elements that are part of the page structure? And this is the part I mentioned at the beginning. Really, for this stuff to make sense, you need to be comfortable with HTML and CSS. And it's not that hard. There's lots of online classes that are pretty brief that you could take to ramp up on this if you haven't dug into it in the past. So all that said, once you do that, you're going to go into once you have this background, you're going to go into your website. You're going to bring up the dev tools, and you're basically, for each element you want. So for example, right, I'm going to look at my login field, at the email address box, the password box, and the login button, and I need to figure out, how do I identify those elements programmatically? And these are all the ways you can locate them within Selenium. Actually, there's a few more. These are 3x, 4x adds a few more, but these are the main ways. So the class name, if I have a CSS class, I can basically find it by that. And then for each one of these, I have an example, right? So we can see, if I have a paragraph tag here with a class of content, right? So I can basically say, look at the class name content, and it's going to find that element. I can use CSS selector. Then I have an example of that. I can use an identifier. Identifiers are especially good because if they're used correctly, they're supposed to be unique. So this is really, if the element has an ID, like, that's generally the easy button. I can also look at the link text. If I can look for particular link text. I can look if there's a name. So for example, a lot of times an input field will have a name like, username or password or something like that, which makes it easy to find. I can look at particular tags, like H1, H2, select, whatever. And then the last option is I can look at Xpath. So Xpath is super powerful. It is really powerful, but it is also very complex. So a lot of people groan when you talk about it. Okay, so we have all those different options. That's a lot, right? So what should we actually use? So there's a great blog called Automation Panda, and this gentleman, he lives for automation. He is really good. He's got hundreds of articles, and this he just lives and breathes this stuff. So it's a great source. And so I took it from one of his blogs, and then this is what he recommends, and it totally makes sense to me. So if I have a choice, the first one I want to use is the ID. The ID should be unique, and we'll talk about how to confirm that. So if that's there, that's the way I want to go. Then I look for the name. If the element isn't named, then I can see if there's a unique class name. I can see if there's some kind of unique CSS selector. And then I have some XPath options or link text. Now these ones at the bottom, and XPath is in there twice. The reason they're at the bottom is basically because they're more fragile. So especially the last two, the challenge with that is if you put in text, remember, computers are not, and programs are not all that smart, right? They basically do exactly what you tell them. So if you put in text and somebody changes the case or like adds some punctuation or changes the spacing, that's all it takes, and then you're not going to match anymore. So anything where you're counting the exact chain of elements like number 7, or you're looking for specific text, that tends to be fragile, because if somebody makes minor changes to the site, then your automation's going to fail, right? So you only want to use those as a last resort. And actually, I found this handy because when I started this, I started out doing a couple with 7, and then one I was able to not do with texting, which makes it more resilient. Okay, and then also you will constantly hear developers that live in the web space complain about XPath. And it's kind of curious, it's really that bad? So XPath is really cool. It's super powerful. It's part of XML, but it is just really, it's basically like its own programming language. So here are some books that talk about XPath, and the middle one is over 1,300 pages. So that gives you an idea of, is very powerful, but it can be really complex, and I think that's part of why you get the groans. That said, if you Google around, I found some stuff on Mozilla and some other sources that just had a couple pages of the most common things, and I was able to accomplish pretty much everything I wanted to do just with that. So I wouldn't use it as my first choice, but there are definitely some cases where it's going to be necessary. Okay, so going back to, and basically with this, I'm just zooming in here, right? So this is from when I first get into my application, I'm zooming into this part of the login screen. Now, in a browser, I believe this is universal, but I did this in Chrome. I can click on any element. I can right click on it and say inspect. And basically what that's going to do, that's going to bring up the dev tools. And then also when I inspect, it's going to jump right to the part of the DOM or the code that basically that element got rendered or created from. So I can see in this case, in my email address input box, basically I have this input ID equals email. So the first thing is, again, going back here, when I'm trying to locate an element, my first choice is if I see an identifier. So I can see right here, this element has an ID of email. So that looks really promising. So it should be unique, but it's always good to check. So basically what we can do is in Chrome, you can just hit Control F. You can also bring it up manually, but Control F for find, and then you can type in, and I go through the steps here, right? Control F to search for the locator. If it's an ID, you search for #email. And then if you look down here at the bottom, you can see you don't put in the quotes or won't match, but I'm just saying literally type #email. So you can see down here #email, and right here you can see it says 1 of 1. So what that's telling me is within this page, that's unique. So that's awesome. That's exactly what I want. I have an identifier, it's unique. That means it's the perfect way to find this element. So that's really the best case scenario is you're looking for something, it has a unique identifier that makes it super easy to find. So I'm not going to go through each one of these, but you basically use the same technique where for each one, you're either right click and say inspect. Once you have DevTools open, this little guy right here, you can also do Control-Shift-C, or you can click on this and you can select something. Those all do the same thing. They basically help you identify from the element. It basically goes to, here's the code that creates that element. So when we look at password, we find that password also has unique ID. So basically for those two fields, it's very easy to identify them. The login button, there's no unique ID. So here's what we see for the login button, this div right here. And the best I could do is I had to use an Xpath, right? So basically I'm saying, actually, I did it like this, but if I had to do it again, I would actually, instead of star basically means look at all elements, but really that's unnecessary. I could say look at div elements. So I'd replace that star with a div, but this works. And then I basically say, okay, any element or div element that basically has a class that matches this, right? Which this one does. We can see the class properties login button. So it has that. We're going to find that element. But then this isn't the element we want. This is the parent, the container element, right? So we want to go down to the button. So we find this div with class of login button, and then we go down to the button. So again, Xpath is, it takes some getting used to, but if Stack Overflow or Googling around, you can usually figure it out. So by doing that, this lets me get to the button. Okay, so what does this look like in code? One more thing that I want to explain before I go through this is when I started doing this, because there's a whole bunch of different ways. When I'm using WebDriver, it's got a whole bunch of different methods. So I started doing, the old syntax was like literally find _element _by _ID. That stuff got deprecated in 4.x. There's another option where you can say find _element, open parentheses, by equals quote, and then ID or CSS name or whatever you want to use. And at first I started doing that, but I ran into some problems where I think I fat fingered something or didn't type it right, and then Selenium would blow up, and I'm thinking like, oh, that's kind of a pain. So when I looked at the documentation, I noticed that they do this in the docs, and also when I look on Automation Panda, they basically do this import by. And at first when I saw that, I'm like, is that really necessary? But the nice thing about this is if I basically use this, then basically everything's fixed. So basically, when I use VS Code, or if you use anything that supports basically automatic completion, when you use this by and I type by dot, then it's going to show me all 7 options. So that way you don't have to worry about fat fingering something. You literally just pick the right one. So I highly recommend using this, because then you never have to worry about, picking something that doesn't exist or selecting the wrong one. You can see all the options when you code. So basically I'm saying by ID, this is the identifier, and by XPath, and this is my XPath identifier. One more thing I wanted to mention too is, so I find the element, now what am I going to do? So going back to this, I want to basically, if I were a user, I would type in my email address, type in my password, and click on login. So basically I'm simulating that with send keys. So basically I'm finding this form, and then I'm sending the keys, and I'm sending this username. And then I'm finding this password form, and I'm basically sending the password. And then I'm finding the login button, and then I'm clicking on it. So that's how I'm basically going through and I'm emulating the user behavior. Because when I launch Selenium, it's going to launch an instance of the browser, like Chrome in this case. It's going to navigate to the website. It's going to log in. Then it's going to populate these fields, and it's going to click the login button. So it's basically just like a user. Okay, so once we jump in to the app, here's the calendar app, and there's nothing yet for this month. But in this app, we can go back, so we can basically pick a month and a date. And so I basically I choose June of 2021, and that's going to show a bunch of meetings, and I'm going to pick one of the meetings. So again, if I were a user, what I would do is I would actually click on this month, and I'd select the month, then I'd click on the year and select the year. So I have to do that same thing. I have to figure out, how do I do that using Selenium? Right, and this is just kind of an example. You can see when you click on those, it has a Dropbox, and you have to pick a value. Okay, so same thing. You'll either right click and click inspect, or do the Control-Shift-C or select the element, and you're basically saying, okay, this Dropbox right here, this is what it looks like on the right? So if I inspect this Dropbox, here's my select, and then here are all my possible values that I can choose from. So I have to figure out, how do I find this programmatically, and then how do I choose the right one? So I can see here that this class identifier is unique. So that's a start for basically getting to the Dropbox and clicking on it. And then I can see for this, there really wasn't any great option, so I kind of was stuck with Xpath. So one thing that I wanted to mention that I found super helpful is, when I started going through this application and I was trying to find various values, sometimes when you have to use a CSS selector or an XPath selector, especially because this app is actually not too bad, but some apps can really get complex, with really big pages. So I was thinking, like, every time I run the program, it's kind of slow because it has to start up the browser and go through all the steps and crash. Isn't there a way I can validate stuff in the browser? So it turns out in Chrome, you can actually check your XPath syntax directly in Chrome. So in the Chrome DevTools, if you open up the console, you can do it. So this is in JavaScript, basically. You can do this $X, and then basically you put in the XPath expression, and right away it will show you if it matches something or not, and you can hit enter. And it's great because if Chrome doesn't like it, right away it will spit back an error. I don't like this. Or if it can't find anything, it'll return an empty array. Or if it finds more than one thing, it'll return like a multiple element array. So this is great because rather than having to run through your program, you can basically try stuff out right in Chrome, and you can see, like, is this working? Is this getting me what I want, right? So I can see when I put in this XPath expression, it returns this. And I can actually open this and expand it, and I can confirm, yes, that's the one element I want. So I found this really helpful, because if you don't do this, trying to look at stack traces and basically figure it out is really painful. It's much easier if you do it directly in the browser. And it took me quite a bit of experimentation, but I was eventually able to figure out that that Xpath expression lets me get to that value right there. So in code, so basically I get to the calendar, and then right here, I am looking for this unique class name, and this basically finds, this first one here is finding this Dropbox right here. It finds the Dropbox, and then it clicks on it. So when you click on it, that's basically going to show, that's going to show all the values. Okay, so this line 19, this is basically going to that, and it's basically displaying my menu. And then in line 20, I'm using this XPath expression, and I'm basically, value 6 is June. So I'm selecting June. Then basically, I didn't go through it, but the same steps, it turns out that the year actually has an ID. So there's a little inconsistency in this app, but so basically if I go to this ID, that gives me, again, that gives me exactly this. So I'm clicking on this, and then it's showing me all the years I can choose from. Okay, so in 22, I'm doing the year drop down, and then again, I'm using an XPath expression, and I'm picking 2021. So basically what I've done is I've clicked the Dropbox, selected June, clicked the year Dropbox, and selected 2021. And that's going to get me to the next part. So now when I go in, so that's going to jump me into what's available in June, and it's a whole bunch of meetings. And basically, we picked out this one particular meeting, and all of these are hyperlinks. And we picked out, this is the meeting we want to validate when we do testing. So again, same thing. Right now I'm at this part of the website. So again, I'm going to right click on this and click inspect, and basically see, how do I uniquely find this to get there with Selenium. Now, one interesting thing that I ran into that I thought is worth pointing out is flakiness and race conditions. So one interesting challenge is in the testing world, when you do unit tests are very granular. So you're typically testing a function or part of a function. Unit tests, you're typically talking milliseconds, and normally the definition of unit test is no external dependencies. So in other words, I'm not going out to the internet, I'm not going to the web, I'm not going to the file system, I'm not going to a database. Like, everything should be self-contained. And if I have to do that, I typically mock it out. So I'm simulating it as opposed to really doing it. Because unit tests are supposed to be completely controlled and super fast. So when I do those unit tests, I go through them really fast, really quickly. And because everything is local, I'm not going to anything external. I have excellent control of the environment, right? So I have a high degree of confidence that if my unit test fails, there's something wrong with my code, right? Now, when I do end-to-end testing, it's a little trickier, because now I am using an external dependency. So where a unit test might complete in milliseconds, an end-to-end test, the industry average is around a minute. So it's several orders of magnitude worse. So the other problem is, the reason a unit test doesn't use anything external is it makes it more reliable and predictable. Because in Selenium, I'm actually launching a browser that, there's a whole bunch of room for error, right? Something could go wrong with the browser, maybe a new browser changes something. There's just all kinds of things, right? Because we're basically talking about Selenium is remote controlling a foreign program that updates on its own, that changes on its own, that does its own things. So we don't have as high of a degree of confidence, and we have to be a little more flexible. So what I'm seeing here is I launched Selenium, and it didn't always happen, but sometimes when I would run it, I would get this traceback. So in Python, when I get a traceback, I always want to start from the bottom up. So I see here, no such element exception. So it can't locate my link text committee meeting. Now, this works sometimes, and I know that that's correct. So when I first ran into this, I'm like, what's going on? But then again, like, I watched some stuff from Automation Panda because he deals with this all the time. And basically what's happening is sometimes when you load a page, because remember, this page isn't local, this page is somewhere on the internet, right? It's actually in AWS. So when I'm loading this page, sometimes it's quick, but sometimes, maybe, it takes, instead of being like 200 milliseconds, maybe sometimes it's a second. And if it takes too long, then basically Selenium tries to find this right away. It tries to go as fast as it can to find this element. And if the page isn't completely loaded yet, it's going to say, oh, that element doesn't exist, and it fails with a traceback. So basically what I have to do is I have to say, okay, we got to provide some time. And it depends. If it's a really slow site, maybe bump this up to 5 or 10 seconds or more. In my case, I think generally speaking, the site should always load in less than 3 seconds. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying, okay, Selenium, wait up to 3 seconds for everything on the page to load before you try to find it. And once I added this, that basically got rid of my problems. Now, I will provide some resources at the end, but one thing I wanted to say, this I'm keeping simple. So I'm keeping everything simple. It's very basic. No, I'm not dealing with exceptions. Not really doing much error handling. So on a complex app, this might not work. You might have to do more control with timing, and that gets more complicated. So I just wanted to mention that, this is kind of the easy button where we just say wait 3 seconds for everything to load. But on a complex site where you have external dependencies and stuff, this might not cut it. You might have to add in some timing components. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so now with that added, here's this 33 is the new line. This is where I'm basically adding in. I'm looking for the link text and I'm clicking on it. So this is basically finding this hyperlink and clicking on it. That's what this line 33 is doing. Okay, so we're most of the way there. So now I've got here's my meeting. I can see, and basically we can see right here. Here's the meeting agenda. Now, one thing that was interesting here is when I looked at this icon. So in terms of a user, this is super easy, right? Here's the document. Now, obviously, I click on this and it opens it. It's really easy. However, it turns out that programmatically, there really is no great way to find that element. The links change the way they're done, so you don't really want to refer to that. And there's no class name, there's no ID, there's really nothing, because this is a whole table with a bunch of attachments. So there's no great way to identify this. And Selenium 3, that would actually that might be a problem. It would not be easy to make it work. However, it turns out Selenium 4 added a new feature called relative locators. And this is what I mentioned. So in addition to those 7 locators I mentioned before, Selenium 4 adds these 5. So what's cool about these is, let's say that, so it turns out the PDF itself, this part right here, this is really easy to find because I know what it says, so it's super easy to find this. So what I can do is, if I can find an element, then I can say, okay, give me the element to the left, or give me the element above or below or to the right, or give me the element that's nearest to it. So this is really cool. If you have something that, the particular thing you want to click or select, there's no way to get to it, but you can get to something next to it. That makes it really easy to basically locate that element. So using that, the first thing I do is I have to load the proper support. So I basically import the locate with. That basically supports the relative locators. And then what I'm going to do is the agenda text. So that's this right here. So this is easy to find. So I basically say, okay, find the agenda text because I know it's called this. And then basically I'm going to say, to the right of the agenda text, I want to get this guy, right? So I want to get the anchor tag that's to the right of the agenda text. So again, here's my agenda text. This guy has the hyperlink to the PDF I want. So you have to maybe read it a few times, but essentially I'm saying to the right of that, I'm finding this hyperlink. And then I basically said, okay, I want to get, from that element, I want to get the actual, HTTP reference that it's pointing to. Okay, so we're getting close. So now the last steps are, I have the URL that's basically where the PDF is stored. So I don't really want to save the file. I just want to basically download it in memory and examine it in memory, because I don't want to save it, then I have to clean it up. So I don't want to do that. And then I basically use some kind of a library. And this is pretty easy. Any popular language, it varies depending on the language, but all the popular languages have great PDF support. So you basically just, in Python, this one works well, PyPDF2. You're going to use some kind of a library that understands how to parse the PDF. And then we've identified, okay, when you look in the PDF, if it has A, B, and C, then we know it's good. So these are the steps to take. So to complete this program, these first two, IO and URL lib, these are part of the Python standard library. So basically what this is doing is, instead of saving it as a file and then opening the file, I'm basically saying, I just want to represent it as like a byte stream. So I'm not sure if it's a method or function, but basically this guy in the IO library lets me do that. Lets me download that PDF and just keep it in memory. URL lib is pretty much like it sounds. This is built in the Python standard library, and this lets me actually download the file from the web. And then here's the PDF library I'm going to use that basically lets me parse the PDF file and pull information out of it. Okay, so this guy right here, I'm basically saying, so remember from before, right? I basically found, using Selenium, I got the URL where the PDF is at. But with that PDF URL, I am going to use the standard library to open it. So that's going to start downloading this. And then what this with block right here, what this does is, when you download something, it's streaming, right? So when you download a file, it's not instantly available because it's coming over the internet. It might take a few hundred milliseconds or even a few seconds. So you need something that's going to keep looping until it's complete. So what this is doing is, this will keep looping until the whole PDF is downloaded, and then that's what this is doing here, right? It's basically saying keep reading and stuffing it into this byte stream. And then when this is complete, here's my PDF stream, right? So it's basically my PDF. It's just stored as a file in memory. Okay, and then once it's my mouse is being interesting here. So once I have that guy in memory, then I'm basically going to use this library. And this PDF stream is basically like a file now. So I'm basically opening the file with the library. And then I'm get page 0. I'm basically taking the first page of the document and I'm basically extracting all the text. Now, when I do that, if you literally look at a text stream, it's going to be like, the first line and then carriage return, and the second line, carriage return. But that's all jumbled together as one big long string. So in order to make it easy to search through that, what I'm doing here is I'm saying get rid of all the carriage returns at the end. So it's basically like one super long sentence. And I'm doing that because that makes it easier to search. And then again, to make it easy to search, I basically convert everything to lowercase so I don't have to worry about if it's upper or lower. Then what we did here is we said, okay, if this is the right PDF document, it should have the following phrases in it, and we came up with a few phrases. And then this is just straight Python. I'm basically saying, okay, for all of my phrases that should be in this file, which I call page checks, if any of the page checks are not present in there, then it's the wrong file. Yeah, I mean, here's kind of cutesy, wrong document, but if that were the case, you might want to, raise an exception or log something. But for the purposes of this talk, I'm hoping that makes it obvious. But if everything succeeds, then we're set. We basically have confirmed that we've downloaded the PDF successfully and we validated that it's the right PDF. So this has been Selenium has been super helpful for me because I was able to take basically a long tedious process, and now it's completely automated. So I can run it. and it runs. It takes less than 10 seconds to run. Basically goes through everything and confirms that everything works. And that's really the most critical test. But now I can add more. I can do things like I can basically create register a new user and confirm it works. Then when I register the new user, I can go to our mail app and I can basically confirm that the mail app received the notification. Then I can basically automatically activate the user and confirm they can change their password and log in. Then I can confirm that the right people can create new documents. So basically all the stuff we're doing by hand before, now I can automate that. I can create a complete test suite, and then anytime our developers want to make a change, they can make the change, run through the whole test suite, and if everything comes back and passes, they know they're good. So and that's really the best place to be, because now every time our business unit owner or somebody wants a new feature, we can implement the new feature. Or if we have a security vulnerability and have to upgrade something, or if AWS upgrades one of their services, no problem. We just complete the update or the new feature, run all the tests, and make sure everything works. And now it's not a big deal. As opposed to before, it was super tedious. Everybody was dragging their feet. Now it's easy. So I found this really helpful. That said, when you're going through this, this is just kind of a basic whirlwind tour. That's an introduction to Selenium. But in production, there'd be more things you'd have to address. So first of all, I didn't deal with error handling. So you would probably want to deal with errors and exceptions, with try catch or something. The other thing too is I wanted to keep the focus on Selenium because I felt like adding in a testing framework was too much. But when you're doing this in production, you definitely need to wrap this in a testing framework. So the by far in Python, the most popular one right now is PyTest. And so really what you'd want to do is you'd want to take this and you'd want to wrap it in PyTest. And the advantage of that is all the steps I went through at the beginning in terms of okay, so all these steps: log into the test site, log into the app, navigate to a specific date, select a specific meeting, find the link, download the PDF, and validate it. All of these steps should be individual tests. That way we know if any one step fails, it's going to say, hey, this particular step failed. So that's important because you don't just want, hey, the test failed. You want to know, hey, when I tried to go to this part of the site, it didn't work. So that way you know exactly where to look. The other thing too is the framework will give you a report. It'll show you, what succeeded, what failed, and the framework's also usually pretty good at capturing exceptions or errors and saying, here's why it failed. So not to leave you empty-handed, if you actually want to see a really fantastic walkthrough of that, I highly recommend. So Andrew Knight, this is the gentleman who does the Automation Panda website. So at PyCon 2020, he actually did a 3-hour tutorial on exactly that. So he goes through Selenium and he does some basic searching in DuckDuckGo and basically validating that the search actually worked correctly. So in terms of what he does with Selenium, it's more basic. However, what's really cool is he wraps everything in PyTest and shows how to set everything up, including how to deal with configuration, variables, how to deal with multiple browsers, how to deal with parallelization. He even starts talking about, if you want to leverage like a grid or something. He gets into a lot of details on how to deal with all those aspects. But like I said, this is a whole 3-hour tutorial, which is more time than we had tonight. But this will walk you through all those steps and give you the resources if you want to expand out or if you want to look into using Grid or Sash or something like that. So with that said, Craig, I'm not sure exactly how to do Q&A.
Well, what we can do is if anyone has a question, feel free to raise your hand or you can paste it into the chat. Roller, you had one question earlier about mixing a WebDriver with an IDE, and I'm not sure if that was addressed or not. Do you want to follow up a question on that, Roller?
Yeah, sure. So the IDE part was interesting. I've never tried it, the playback, record and playback. So I was wondering, could you record something that you didn't feel like writing the code for, but incorporate it into your code so that you could write most of it in code, but then you could just play back something?
I think that's possible. I haven't actually played with the IDE, but my understanding is it does create some kind of code. I think it's called Selenium. I'm not sure. I think it's like JavaScript like. So if you use JavaScript, it'd probably be pretty straightforward. If you use something else, you might have to convert it or wrap it or something like that. But I believe that's possible. So did that does that help or?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll dig into it some more too. It just sounds like that's a pretty awesome idea and concept.
Yeah, it looks pretty cool. It's just so many cool things and so little time. So what can I say?
Yeah. Just another question real quick. So I saw that you didn't find a good way to select an element from a drop-down list, target the drop-down list and then select it. I use that in my app that I built, and it's in the navigation section on that Read the Docs page. And it's they have one called Select, so you can import Select from the WebDriver.support.ui, and then you can just you can find the element and then select the text by name. I mean, just by the actual visible text, you could just type it in.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I ended up doing. So the way I did it is I looked at the value, because if you see, if you go back here, if you look at this menu, see with the list, there's nothing unique, right? So there's no class names or IDs. So yeah, you could either select the value or you could select the text. I didn't do the text because it turns out with all these month names, they're not unique. So it turns out, like for example, when I looked at June was in a bunch of places in the document. So I couldn't do that because it's not a unique identifier. But if I did the combination of finding this parent and then from this parent drilling down into value equals 06, that worked. But like it's also kind of interesting writing the test, because like if you're actually creating the web application, it might be nice to put some IDs or names or something in here to make it easier to identify it.
Well, what
Right,
I was
so
saying, you can import, so you can say from selenium.webdriver.support.ui, you can import select, and then you can use select, and within it, you can do a find element by CSS and select that the CSS selector of that you had there.
yeah, yep.
And then
That definitely works.
and then inside, and then after it, you can put dot select by visible text. It's a feature of the select thing.
Yep, that works.
Oh, and then the other thing was the WebDriver wait is another one. So they have one where you can wait until there's a presence of something located on the page.
Yeah, actually, that's a great point. So that resource, this has, because I remember Andrew mentioned that. Yeah. So on this, the weight section that talks about, and that's something I didn't go into here, but that talks about the different kind of weights and what makes sense, and that's a good introduction to, if you have a more complex page or using Ajax or something like that, that starts to go into some options. So yeah, thank you for mentioning that. That's a great place to look to start getting up to speed on that.
Yeah, no problem. And then just a heads up for people that if you do start in, so I started mixing things like that paperclip, because Selenium does have a send keys, so you can send text like you were typing it. But I had that originally, and then I changed it to a paperclip thing where I was copying from a Google Doc and then I was trying to paste it into a page, and that works. But like you said, Selenium is very quick, and sometimes it would do all the stuff and paperclip would still be pasting and it would just move on and like load the next
Okay.
something. So I definitely had to put some of those weights, like you showed, like those implicit weights.
Yeah, that's the tricky thing, because the browser is designed for humans, not for machines, right? So yeah, if you're running it through a program, then you really have to be cognizant of all the wait times, because yeah, that's a great example. It's going to try and zip right through stuff and not wait long enough.
Yeah, it doesn't care the other stuff you imported and the other libraries are using it. It's just like, all right, cool, let's go.
Yeah. So what's the next thing? It tries to do the next thing as fast as it can. So cool. Yeah, Paperclip. I've heard of that. That sounds cool. I've played with that. But yeah, I mean, there's tons of stuff you can do.
Yeah,
When you look at this with automating stuff and with playing around with the different options and getting stuff back and forth, and so it's pretty slick.
yeah, the send keys thing is nice because with Paperclip you get to send like the copy, and then you can just do a quick check, like, is this Mac? Okay, then do Command C, but otherwise do Control C or whatever.
Okay.
And then you got it copied. But yeah, I got that example from the automate the boring stuff.
Oh, okay. Cool. Okay.
Are there any other questions out there?
What about you, Craig? Did I cover what you were hoping? Is there anything else you were curious about?
No, that's pretty much what I was looking at as well. So I do automated testing in that. So I was doing more with the PyTest type stuff. But yeah, figuring out all the wonderful things with Xpath and all that other wonderful stuff. It's fun. And I did not. And I do say I did learn one thing, and that is how to download the web drivers automatically, because that is my biggest pain point right now, is having all of those kept up to date. So this is
it gets painful quick, especially if you have multiple versions and 32 and 64-bit and different platforms, and yeah.
Or Chrome just decides all of a sudden to sneak an update in there, and
exactly.
stop working. Although it does tell you that it's not compatible, as opposed to just doing weird stuff.
Okay.
But yeah, it's still a pain, because it's like, oh yeah, now here's one more thing I need to do. Thanks.
It's always when you're showing people, hey, check out this cool thing I built, and then
then it blows up.
I do have a question. Just it's kind of out there a ways. So I can see that this is primarily set up for web-based testing. I'm just wondering what the limits are. Could I set it up to verify a back-end system, or creating an entire environment with different virtual machines and running different creation of databases and all kinds of additional automation like that?
So if you want to do API testing, I'm not sure I'm not clear if this is the tool you'd want to use. Craig, I don't know if you can comment on that. I mean, my impression is this is more like if you want to test the browser as a user, right? Because the big challenge with browser testing is if I download the, if I try and just emulate a browser, for example, right? I could try and emulate a browser, or I could basically interact with a site directly. The problem is JavaScript, because I can emulate parts of it, but if I don't have a full browser running a full JavaScript engine, a lot of websites don't behave correctly, or don't even work. So that's really the big problem Selenium's solving, is it's actually running a real browser that has a fully implemented JavaScript environment. So when you're testing web applications, especially anything that's based on a modern JavaScript framework like React, it's actually going to work correctly. Because if you don't do that, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to test. So that I think is the primary use case for Selenium. If you want to do API testing, I guess I don't see why you'd use this, because it's kind of slow, right? Because
there's better tools for it.
That's what I would think. Yeah, because with an API, it's designed for computers, so you don't really need like delays or clever things. It's an API. It's designed to be directly called, right? And then if you want to do Windows like GUI applications that aren't web based, Yeah, you can't do that with Selenium. Although there are other tools to automate those, but that's not what Selenium does.
I'm trying to remember the one that I was using that was
I think
really
there's like
good.
WinApp or something like that for, if I remember, for Windows
Postman
apps.
was the one that I was using.
Oh yeah. Postman is awesome for APIs.
Yeah.
That's a great one.
It used to be a little more lenient in its licensing, and then they stopped doing so, which is why I started moving over to stuff like curl and whatnot, because that also can do API testing, although it's not nearly as automated, but it's good enough for what I was doing. But yeah,
the curl. I would be careful with curl. The problem with curl is I think it's written in C, so therefore I don't know how good its Unicode support is going to be. I mean, I guess if it's not web based, but the web is all Unicode.
Yeah, no, this is for just some kind of weird stuff that I was doing. It was more, I just needed something that would just make sure that I was getting a particular response out of it.
Okay.
And also for Selenium too, some frameworks like Django have the ability to do testing for just the HTML stuff. So if you wanted to do something like create a user or some other thing like that, that's where I would go for that. The stuff that I would use Selenium for is the strictly, you have to have JavaScript running in order to make this particular thing work. And that's where none of the tools really work as well as Selenium does, is trying to mimic the modern intricacies and quirks of modern JavaScript. So that's where it really shines.
Yeah, especially infinite scroll.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great example. And I guess so Django's a good example. Django has its own test framework, but there are some cool things with Selenium, like especially if you want to see how it looks. Like one thing I didn't mention is Selenium can take a screenshot and then either load it in memory or save it as a file. So you can even if you had something like oh, no, I can't remember off the top of my head, but the if you have one of the machine learning that they can basically look at images and do intelligent comparisons and stuff like that. I can't remember what it's called, but there's a really good program that makes that pretty easy. So like in Django, if you want to see is my site similar on Firefox, Chrome, Edge, and Opera and other browsers. That can be kind of useful to maybe load it up and like look at the screenshots or something and compare stuff.
Yeah, I think I've seen examples of that using OpenCV.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you. That's what I was looking for.
Dave, you've been very patient. Do you have a question?
I think my question got answered, and it just sort of struck me like a lot of these things would be useful in doing screen scraping and text, looking for things in screens and files. But I think your observation that they're probably just better tools for it because this is solving so much of the extra work that you need for web pages that you don't need all that extra for them. So I think that answered my question with the previous discussion.
Where I would use Selenium for that is if I absolutely had no other options and JavaScript was getting between me and the data that I needed to go and get, because otherwise, yeah, I'd either look for an API or bring up something like Beautiful Soup in Python to parse the page, rather than trying to drag it through Selenium. But yeah, if no other option presented itself, then yeah, Selenium would be where it would be. Any other questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to also point out that so one of the people in my Python group, they made a infinite scroll Selenium, and originally they were using page down, send keys page down to have it keep loading, but then their test started failing when they changed the screen resolution. So what they did was they had to change. Screen resolution is one of those things that can cause the element not found issue, because I guess they were like counting how many were on the screen, and then when the screen resolution changed, there was more on the screen and it failed. So I guess they were just like selecting the bottom row and then having it load or something like that.
Okay. Actually, that reminds me, there a few more interesting things. So because Selenium is basically emulating a user in a user's computer, you know, you can like minimize, maximize. You can like press forward and back buttons. You can see what the resolution is. You know, so that's really where it shines. Is, you know, when you need to pretend like you're a user at a browser in an automated way. That's what Selenium's made for, and it's really good at that. Like pretty much anything you can do as a human, it can emulate. So that's where it really helps you, you know, when you have to do like some, you know, human specific application that's made for a person to actually click through, or even you can even drag and drop stuff or draw things or whatever. So that's really its power.
Yeah, and if you don't want it to actually show the browser once you're finished writing all the tests, you can have it hide the browser.
Yeah, that's a great point. So yeah, so that's an excellent point. So when you write your tests, usually when you're testing them and developing them, you want the browser to actually launch. But like if you're a developer and you're doing everything on your own computer, once you have the test finished and you're confident it works correctly, you can pass a headless option. I know that works for Chrome and Firefox, and I'm assuming since Edge is based on Chrome, I'm assuming it works through Edge. I'm not sure about the other browsers, but for those browsers, when you run in headless mode, the cool thing about that is it's completely invisible. So you can just kind of kick it off in the background, and then you can keep developing like normal. You know, whereas if you actually run it, it kind of gets in the way. So that headless mode is a really nice option. So yeah, thank you for mentioning that.
Any other questions? Well, if not, I would like to thank you, Jim, for this excellent presentation on Selenium. Definitely, like I said, I learned something that I'll be probably implementing very shortly to try and alleviate some of the pain. But yeah, this is a fantastic tool. And again, if anyone has, if you're doing anything with the web and you think, oh, I don't need to do any testing on that, trust me, you will need to test your applications at some point. And this is a fantastic way to make sure that you're not having to maintain a checklist of all the stuff that you have to click in order to make sure that you didn't break anything. So even if you're not necessarily the one writing the code, if you're the one that's responsible for the code, I would recommend checking this out. All right, and with that, please fill out the comment card as much as you are willing and are able to do so. And Jim McQuillan, is there anything else that you would like to speak about?
Anything else to talk about, or anything else I'd like to say? First of all, I'd like to say, Jim Small, thank you so much. This is a fantastic presentation.
Yeah, thank you. My pleasure.
I looked at Selenium. It must have been version 1 back in the mid 2000s, and I just thought, oh God. So when you spoke up and said you could talk about it, I had no idea it had advanced so far, and I'm very impressed. Now I'm going to take another look at it now, and probably use it.
Actually, one other cool thing, since you mentioned that, Jim, is version 4 also comes with the BIDR API. And because some of the newer tools use the DevTools protocol, because it gives you far more power and flexibility to look at the internals of the browser. And with Selenium 4, it actually fully supports that. So you can even communicate with the browser using the DevTools protocol. And like, so anything you can do with Chrome DevTools, you can do through Selenium too. So it starts getting, I mean, it gets, you go down the rabbit hole fast, but it's really an amazing tool.
That's great. So thanks for doing this presentation. I know you're busy, and it took some time to put this thing together, and I really appreciate it. Other than that,